Hello guys, this is your friend Dark Fox 2.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is, what if Naruto returned with the Fox Unleashed, Tsunade, Anko, Kurenai, Shizune and the Kyūbi's Consequences Part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please, press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Sasuke and Sakura weren't disappointed when they both looked over the shoulders of Team Namikaze. One of the reasons they'd applied for being a Junin supervisor in the exams was the expected reaction of the other genin when they saw both Kyūbi and Naruto enter the room for the first part of the exam. The fact that Kyūbi always liked to make an entrance only added to their amusement. Several nin had been forced to dodge the twin doors flying through the room and had looked angrily at the ones responsible. Glares were sent their way until one of the Konoha nin noticed the trademark orange and crimson outfits of the people standing in the hallway. Kyūbi, he whispered, instantly moving backwards. His reaction was mimicked by every single other genin present. Rumors had already spread around the globe at Hiraishin speeds and thus most of the genin from the other villages also knew that Kyūbi had become a leaf shinobi. They hadn't expected her to show up in the Chunin exams though. The backwards motion continued until everyone had their backs pressed against the wall opposite to the entrance, some had even stuck themselves to the wall or ceiling, just to get as far away as possible from the two new entrants. Now this is what I wanted to see, Sasuke smirked as he looked at the terrified genin. He knew it wasn't really nice to act that way, but he still found it hilarious to see. Sakura however wasn't faring much better and effectively had to suppress a few chuckles. A bright flash immediately followed by a clicking sound drew their attention. In the confusion, Kyūbi had pulled out a camera and snapped a picture. For later, she mouthed at Naruto's questioning look. He seemed satisfied by her reply and eagerly looked around the room. Much to his surprise, he recognized a few faces, to be more precise, the Rain Genin team that had participated in his last exam. Well, the parts of their faces that were visible that is. He grinned when they too recognized him and quickly shuffled backwards even further. His expression changed though when he noticed a big black banner hanging in the back of the room. Oh bloody hell no, he shouted when he recognized the writing, even if it was unnecessary to even recognize it. There was only one person in the entire village that used big black banners for just about anything, Mitarashi Anko. A cold shiver ran down his spine as he remembered his first run-in with the bloodthirsty Tokubetsu Junin during his first Chunin exam. Just my luck, to have her as the first examiner, he muttered. It seemed like it was sheer luck that the massive banner said that she'd arrive around 2 o'clock, which was still well over half an hour away. At least it gave him some time to prepare for the inevitable shock. Ignoring the looks of the scared genin, he plopped himself down on one of the benches, Kyūbi settling down right next to him. It didn't look like there was any need to do an introduction this time. I don't see what there's to be afraid of. A voice suddenly cut through the tense atmosphere like a knife through butter. I mean, sure, the guy looks a bit like that bastard Yellow Flash, but I know his history. It was an Iowa nin that had jumped forward and had begun strolling casually towards the couple. You were an orphan, the container to the Kyūbi no Kitsune. So my guess is that they just had a red-headed girl strolling around, put some tails and ears on her and made her parade like the demon fox, while they let some rumors filter out of the village that the seal had broken to make everyone anxious, especially when the rumors said that the little fox in question had joined up with Konoha. Then they took you, her, former, container, made the two of you hook up and told everyone that you, a blonde dead last orphan at that, was the only surviving son of the Yondaime Hokage. Please, I don't even need to see underneath to know that Konoha is lying it's off. Here now Missy, let me just remove those lovely tails of your and then you don't need to put up with this charade and this blonde dumbass anymore. The genin made a move to grab one of Kyūbi's tails, but was intercepted by the back of Naruto's hand. His face contorted in agony as the impact crushed part of his jaw. He let out a pained moan as he sailed back towards his teammates. They moved to catch him, but only succeeded in cushioning his collision with the wall. The three of them sagged down to the floor, two of them unconscious with the third looking terrified at the blonde now standing in front of Kyūbi, exuding a massive aura of killing intent. "Let me make this clear for all of you," he snarled. "I just saved that guy's life, though he's lucky I've become able to control my temper enough. But just so you know, anyone, and I mean anyone that tries to harm Q-chan here will have to go through me first, and I promise you it won't be a pleasant experience." "He's right, you know." Kyūbi grinned as she stood up and moved to Naruto's side. "There's only one man in this world allowed to touch my tails. Anyone else that tries will die horribly, or suffer an even worse fate." The threatening tone in her voice made the genin shiver in fear. It was painfully clear that the one man she meant was standing right next to her. "All right, you rascals, that's enough," an awfully familiar voice interrupted them. The rookie genin looked up in surprise, just before they were scared, again, by something barreling through the window. Said something being Anko, their first examiner. Her entrance however piqued the Kyūbi's interest and she made a quick mental note to try it herself on a later moment in time. Naruto merely sighed as he witnessed the destruction, ignoring the loud wail coming from a repair crew that just happened to pass by. A second black banner unfurled in front of the first one, this time announcing the arrival of the first examiner, Mitarashi Anko. Her timing however was, as usual, horrible and totally out of context. "I'm Mitarashi Anko, the first examiner," she shouted through the room, only to come face to face with the current, seating positions, of the genin, meaning, two people standing on one end, near the door, while the rest was sticking against the wall and ceiling, or in two cases the floor, on the other end. Her attention though was quickly drawn towards the couple, mostly because of the amount of killing intent they were radiating towards the other genin. "All right, cut it out you two," she grinned as she quickly recognized Naruto and immediately assumed that the one standing next to him was the Kyūbi. She'd been there when the announcement had been made, but hadn't gotten a decent look at the two of them because of the distance between herself and the Hokage's tower at the moment. "We don't want to scare off the babies now, do we?" she smiled, completely surprising Naruto with her behavior, "and if you're wondering why I'm not trying to cut up your cheek and such, it's because I only do that to torture scared little kids. In fact, I'm rather impressed with that killing intent of yours right now. If that's settled, can we get on with the exam then?" Naruto replied smugly, "or should we give them some time to calm down?" He pointed at the rest of the participants in the exam. "Nah, they need to get some experience with being scared anyway, especially the rookies." "All right then," she shouted, "for those of you that know how we do things around here, you know the drill. For those that don't, simply grab a number from the box and sit in the assigned seat. Shut up and keep your eyes in front of you." As soon as the genin had picked their numbers and sat down in their seats, Anko continued, ignoring the chattering teeth of those unlucky enough to be seated next to either Naruto or Kyūbi. They were making every effort possible to keep as far away from those two as possible, much to Anko's amusement. "Right, as some of you already know, it's somewhat of a tradition here to make the first test a written exam. The rules are simple, you're given 10 points at the beginning, cheating loses you 2 points every time you're caught. Get 0 points and you and your teammates are out. Every question you answer incorrectly, or don't fill in, will lose you a point." She continued her explanation as she walked around the room, handing out the tests as she went. "Those of you that want to can leave whenever they wish, just don't expect to come back afterwards." As she put Naruto's test in front of him, she grinned. "The test has been adjusted a bit because there's only 2 of you, but that shouldn't be a problem, right? The principle is the same." He looked at the paper lying on the desk. It was almost exactly the same as last year. There were 9 questions about various topics, most that were too hard for the average chunin to answer, but when he looked at the 10th question, he was surprised. As opposed to the previous exam he'd been in, this time there was actually a 10th question. Well, more like a riddle with underneath a big jumble of letters. There are two sisters. One gives birth to the other and she, in turn, gives birth to the first, the riddle said. Naruto was stumped. He never had been good at riddles. Thankfully, Kyūbi had quite a bit of experience with them. I recognize this riddle, she said to him in his mind, and the letters underneath it are actually part of a seal. This comment caused some gears to turn in Naruto's mind. Recalling his previous exam, he noticed that some seals could be split up into several parts. Given the fact that there was a seal right below that particular riddle, it could only mean one thing. I think we need to get both parts of the seal together, he replied. My thoughts exactly. It's a riddle of ancient times past. The true answer is actually the day and night, but I think that in this situation, most people would interpret it as you did. But how will we get them together? He asked, already breaking his head over that particular problem. The proctors will surely notice it if we're passing our papers to the other. He shifted his gaze nervously to the said chunin that were sitting to the sides of the room, keeping an ever-watchful eye. While he knew that they couldn't pick up his conversation with Kyūbi, it was still nerve-wracking to do it, especially when the kunai had already started flying, pinning the papers of the more unskilled shinobi to the desks. He and Kyūbi decided to completely ignore the other questions. They knew those were merely superficial tests to see whether someone was skilled at gathering intelligence. The real test was the 10th question, which served a dual purpose. The ability to see underneath the underneath, and how good the genin were at passing information to their allies. Just focus on the seal as hard as you can and try to send an image of it to me, I'll write it down next to the other one. I've got the best handwriting of the two of us anyway. Hey, my handwriting is legible. Yeah, but that's about it, you know. Sealing requires a steady hand and perfect handwriting for it to work. Oh fine then, Naruto muttered and started focusing on the seal instead. While it was hard for Naruto to keep his concentration on his paper, he nevertheless succeeded. Kyūbi quickly had it copied down to her own page, where the words instantly started reacting when the last letter had been written down. With a barely perceptible puff, the seals vanished and in their place came a text. Congratulations on passing the first exam. If you go outside, you will meet an examiner that will give you the necessary information for the second exam. Please take this form as proof that you have passed, it said. Well, Naru-kun, looks like we passed. Kyūbi grinned as she sent a mental picture of the completed seal to Naruto. You want to do the honors of announcing our exit? Nah, you can do it, I'd probably mess it up anyway. Carefully, as not to startle anyone, Kyūbi raised her arm. What is it, Namikaze Kyūbi? Anko grinned. She should have known that the fox would have been the first to pass the exam. Proof of this was the exam form that she had subtly hidden in her sleeve. A simple handkerchief with a hinge on it made it seem as though she had left her exam paper on the table, face up with some fake answers filled in on some random questions. I'd like to leave Mitarashi-san, she announced, eliciting a startled gasp from the rest of the genin crowd. They couldn't believe it. It was only about 10 minutes into the exam and already the most feared team had just given up. This, however, made some of the more intelligent shinobi start to wonder. The veterans had already started focusing on the 10th question, but had some difficulty figuring it out. Well, so much for Team Namikaze, Anko sneered. You can leave if you want to, but don't expect to be allowed back in if you change your mind. As Kyūbi rose, Naruto mimicked her action. Anko raised an eyebrow in surprise. Naruto had been sitting with his back towards the fox, yet he still had stood up at exactly the same moment. Taking into account that Kyūbi moved as quietly as a Junin-level stealth specialist, that was a remarkable feat. Grimly, she realized that the two of them must have had some way of being in constant communication with the other, yet she hadn't even noticed. She, a Tokubetsu Junin, had been had by the two of them, and apparently without any trouble at all. Her attention shifted quickly though when she noticed a Konoha that was a bit too obvious with using soft taps of his pen to communicate with his teammates. Without wasting any time, she flung a kunai directly at his paper, pinning it firmly to the desk. Team 36, you fail, she happily announced, her earlier disappointment already forgotten. So what if she'd been had by the fox in her former container? She still had plenty of little genin to torture. So, you've got anything to say? A Junin confronted Kyūbi and Naruto as they stepped out of the room where the rest of the genin were still sweating under the look of the infamous Anko. We don't have anything to say, Kyūbi announced, we do have something to deliver though. She smirked as she pulled out her exam form and handed it to the proctor. Alright, you've passed the first test, and with setting a new record I might add, the Junin announced. He did seem a bit disgruntled at that fact but that was quickly suppressed. It wasn't really allowed for a Junin to show too much emotion while on a mission, and technically, acting as a proctor or supervisor during the Chunin exams was considered to be a mission, one of high importance too. Most of the time, the ranks assigned to Chunin exam-related missions were B or even A rank and thus required a certain level of professionalism to them. The second exam starts tomorrow, the details are in here, the Junin said as he handed them a scroll. Naruto quickly put the scroll safely into one of the pockets sewn into the inside of his jacket before they both quickly thanked the Junin and moved off to a safe place to take a look at the contents of the scroll. So, how did you guys do? Sakura asked excitedly as she spotted the blonde and redhead walking out of the building right after the doors seemed to fly off their hinges as if propelled by an invisible force. I thought you guys had to do supervising. Naruto wondered, doesn't that mean that you were watching us? Don't be an idiot, Naruto, Sasuke grumbled, the first exam is extremely low risk. Chances of a fight breaking out are virtually inexistent, and if they would there is still a room filled with Chunin and one Tokubetsu Junin to face. Our job only starts with the second exam. Well, about that second exam, we passed so I guess we'll be seeing you there tomorrow, Kyūbi grinned at them. We'll try to keep out of sight though, Sasuke grinned back in response. As I said, we'll see you tomorrow. After having said goodbye to Naruto's former teammates, the couple moved towards their apartment. Since the next stage of the exam would only take place the next day, they decided to relax until then. This brings back memories, Naruto smiled as he opened the scroll moments after he had closed the door behind Kyūbi's back. Knowing what she usually did to any door in her path, he had taken up the habit of opening and closing the door for her. Those inside the apartment were open all the time so that problem was solved easily. Excitedly, he read through the rest of the scroll, eager to learn as much as he could about the exam. What does Naru-kun? Kyūbi asked as she positioned herself next to Naruto, trying to read it together with him. The second part takes place in Training Area 44, the Forest of Death. I can see why you're a bit nostalgic. When do we need to be there? Let me see. Naruto dove back into the scroll, it says to be there at 9 tomorrow morning, on time. Those that are late are automatically disqualified. Well then we should better go to sleep early on, don't you agree, Naru-kun? Kyūbi smiled mischievously. One look into her eyes sufficed for Naruto to understand that she was planning something different altogether. Not that he minded though. Ever since he'd come to realize that he loved Kyūbi, they had begun cuddling a bit every night. It wasn't much, mostly limited to some kisses and hugs. Naruto felt it was important to him that they moved slowly. Neither of them had much experience on the topic, Kyūbi had only seen some things, and neither didn't want to make a mistake that would hurt the other. Besides, they had all the time in the world. Being immortal sure had its advantages. They could take an eternity getting to know each other. There was a way for them to die though, but that was impossible for anyone to achieve, for it meant that they would have to kill Naruto and Kyūbi both at the same time, so that they couldn't rely on the presence of the other to come back to life. Given the fact that Kyūbi was an immortal demon, it was effectively impossible for them to die, well, permanently that is. So what do we do now, Itachi? Kisame muttered as he watched the hologram of their leader disappear. While surprised at hearing the news, he had still ordered them to continue with their mission, only it had changed from capture Uzumaki Naruto to capture Namikaze Naruto and Namikaze Kyūbi. And why do we have to capture the both of them now? Because there might be a connection between the two of them that we do not know about. If we capture them at the same time, it might help us either understand or neutralize it. Any idea on how to capture them then? As a matter of fact, I do. From what I've heard, the two of them are participating in the Chunin exams and have already passed the first exam. The second exam is traditionally held in Training Ground 44, the Forest of Death, though I did hear rumors that they were planning on changing that, but apparently that proposition wasn't accepted for some reason. We'll infiltrate Area 44 and capture the two of them. Security is usually a bit lax and should be easy enough for us to break through. You're forgetting that particular training ground is located deep inside Konoha. We'd have get past at least 24 of Anbu patrols before we'd even get close. So how are we going to get there? A smirk that made cold shivers run down Kisame's spine appeared on Itachi's face. Out of nowhere, he pulled out a shovel. Start digging, he ordered gleefully. Naruto's alarm rang for exactly half a second before an angry tail smacked it to bits. Naruto groaned as he raised himself out of bed, a still sleepy Kyūbi trying to pull him back onto bed, in vain. Come on Q-chan, time to get up, he gently shook her awake. He knew better than to be as loud as the alarm. Kyūbi had a temper, and it was especially short early in the morning. Many an alarm clock had already met their demise when they had to get up early for a meeting with Tsunade or someone else. Just 5 more minutes, she softly muttered as she turned over to her other side and pulled the covers back over her body, trying to conserve the still lingering heat. I'll go make us some breakfast then, Naruto smiled down at her. He had been expecting a scenario such as this. For that matter, he'd set the clock to go off at 7, 2 hours before they were expected to be standing at the Forest of Death. Even with Kyūbi's morning habits, it was still plenty of time to prepare themselves and go there, even if they should stop for a while on their way there. Soon after, some delicious smells found their way into the bedroom. Kyūbi shot upright as she smelled the food being prepared in the kitchen. She got up and started following the trail. At the end, she found Naruto standing in front of the stove, making a few omelets. She moved behind him and enveloped the blonde in a hug, her arms encircling his waist. Hey there, beautiful, he smiled, keeping one hand on the frying pan's handle while the other moved towards Kyūbi's arms. Gently he squeezed in her hands and turned his head, giving her a soft kiss. Finally awake. More awake than I was 5 minutes ago, came the reply. While she was up and about, it was still clear that she was quite tired nevertheless. Her ears were lying almost flat on her head while her tails almost dragged over the floor, the hair on them sticking out in every direction. Naruto chuckled as he took in her appearance. She was looking incredibly cute, as she always did in the mornings. Every single time she had somewhat of a ruffled look on her and he had to stop himself from jumping her and cuddle her to death. Q-chan, it's already 7:30 you should be a bit more energetic. You're simply too damn hyperactive. I'm more like a normal person in comparison. Naruto frowned a bit. He knew people always said he was the #1 unpredictable hyperactive shinobi from the village, but he always thought that was because of his happy-go-lucky nature. Her comment made him start to think. Every single powerful shinobi he knew always slept in. Kyūbi did, Tsunade did, heck, she even fell asleep at her desk. Kakashi obviously did because he was always late, and let's not mention Jiraiya, especially after he'd been drinking. Then again, he wasn't one likely to go and act like others just because they had a strange quirk in their habits. He simply decided that having a lot of energy and being awake so early in the morning could only be advantageous. Don't be like that Q-chan, it has its good points. True, I've got dinner that's being made for me, so I'll consider that a good point. She grinned as she quickly snatched one of the eggs right out of the pan, deftly flicking it onto her plate. Her own primary element was fire, so she would never get burned. This proved to be quite an advantage whenever she felt like nicking food straight off the stove, which happened quite often actually. Naruto chuckled as he watched Kyūbi pull the egg out of the pan. The look on her face was absolutely adorable in his opinion. Whenever she did something like that, she had a mischievous expression on her face, much the same like Naruto did whenever he was about to pull a prank, but then a lot cuter. Come on then, let's eat, she mumbled with a mouthful of omelette. Naruto quickly joined her and started eating as well. He smiled again as he saw her waking up more and more with every bite she took. The more food she got in her system, the more energetic she became, though it never got as bad as Naruto's energy levels. After they finished up their meal and packed their bags, preparing for a several-day-long survival exercise in the forest, just in case. They took off in the direction of Training Area 44. When they arrived, they noticed, much to their surprise, that they weren't the first ones there, even though it was only 8:15. There were still a full 45 minutes to go until the exam started, yet they could already count a grand total of 24 teams present, themselves not included, and there were still people arriving. Ah damn, we should have stayed behind a bit to see how many teams had passed, Naruto muttered as he watched the genin gather in front of the first gate around the forest. There were 52 teams that took part in the first exam. The last time you took the exam, there were 26 teams that passed out of a total of 43. This time there were 62 teams, so naturally, the number of teams passing the test would be higher as well. Oh well, we'll simply have more targets this way, Naruto sighed as he sat down against a tree, Kyūbi settling between his legs and leaning back against his chest. Without even realizing it, he put his hands around her waist and pulled her closer. Several hours later, there still was no sign of the examiner for the second task and every genin was beginning to get agitated. They had been told to be there at 9, yet it was already 11 and there was still no sign of any Junin or even Chunin. I sure hope that bloody proctor has a damn good excuse when he gets here, otherwise I'm going to kick his, one of the more aggressive Iwanin exclaimed, shaking his fist in anger. His comment however made something click into place in Naruto's mind. It was so obvious now. In all of Konoha, there was one, and only one, Junin that was tardy, every single time. Yo everyone, an all too familiar voice sounded from a puff of smoke that had suddenly appeared near the gate. Sorry I'm late but I forgot to put out the trash this morning so I had to chase the garbage men across half the village. You're late. Several of the genin shouted as the silver-haired Junin appeared in front of them. Anger was visible on their faces, but they refrained from acting on it. They knew they wouldn't stand a chance against the Junin, even if they had numbers on their side. That and it would ruin their chances of becoming a Chunin this exam. So they didn't attack him, even if it would have been utterly satisfying. While several of the genin were still muttering, there were 4 people that had smacked their hands against their foreheads, the other team members of former Team 7 and Kyūbi. While both Sasuke and Sakura had known the identity of the second examiner, they had been forbidden from telling Naruto. Nevertheless, his excuse was as lame as ever, thus provoking such a response from them. I can already see where this is going, Naruto groaned with a pained look on his face, Kyūbi mirroring his expression. Knowing his repertoire of tests and exercises, there's only one thing he'll be doing for this one, Kyūbi muttered. Right, Kakashi began, welcome to Training Area 44, better known as the Forest of Death. Normally, We would have been using another training ground, but some odd couple of genin decided to wreck it only yesterday, so we'll have to use this one. He threw a knowing look towards both Kyūbi and Naruto. Naruto grinned sheepishly and shrugged while Kyūbi had started studying her nails closely. Those genin that had been in the forest before though glared at the couple. They knew what awaited them in there, and were not happy to go and meet it. Today's test, he continued, will be somewhat comparable to the test from the last few times that the exam was held here in Konoha. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 bells. This time, your target are these bells. Every team will be assigned 2 bells at the beginning. The goal is to finish with 3 bells per team. So you'll have to try and steal one from another team. Do note though that one person can only carry 1 bell and that it has to be visible and able to ring. The only exception to this is Team Namikaze. Since they only have 2 people, they can have a maximum of 2 bells on one person. Any questions? Sir, one of the Iowa nin asked, why did they get 2 bells as well? Shouldn't they be given 1 or even no bells? And why is that? Is it because they're only with 2 of them? Is it because they're both Namikazes? Please, they're genin just as the rest of you, and you're with 1 more than they are. Shouldn't that be enough of an advantage already? While Kakashi said this, his only visible eye narrowed as he stared at the Iowa nin. While it seemed as if he was smiling a bit through his mask, it was clear that the next word the genin said would be his last. Even if it was long ago that Obito had died, he still didn't exactly like Iowa nin. Naruto sighed deeply as he watched his former Junin sensei explain the test. It's just one of those days, he muttered. Now, as most of you might have figured out already, Kakashi continued after having scared the socks off the genin, the battle for the bells will be brutal, and there might be some deaths involved, so if you'd be so kind as to fill in these forms so that I won't be responsible. Muttering was heard amongst the genin as they took the forms and filled them in. While they wanted to do the exams, most were irritated by the fact that the tardy silver-haired Junin couldn't be held responsible for anything that would happen. As they slowly started handing in their forms, each team was given a pair of bells and guided towards one of the gates around the complex, Naruto and Kyūbi waving briefly towards the tree where they knew Sasuke and Sakura were hiding. You'll have to wait here until the exam officially starts, one of the 2 Chunin accompanying Team Namikaze told them as they arrived at the gate. Noticing Kyūbi's mischievous look, he quickly continued. The gates will open for you, and any attempt to open them before the test starts will result in immediate disqualification. Kyūbi huffed at this. She'd been eyeing the entrance in anticipation and had been hard-pressed in holding herself back, though a quick semi-glare from Naruto helped with controlling her initial urge to bring down the gate. So, Naruto asked her as they waited for the signal that they could begin, who do you reckon we should go after first? Doesn't really matter, she replied in a bored tone, let's just take on the first genin team we encounter. Naruto took a good look at the ominous forest in front of him, leaving Kyūbi to do whatever she found pleasant at that time. He could still remember the first time they had stood here, as simple little genin. At the time he didn't have any idea what was waiting for him past those gates, though it was safe to say that what had happened wasn't exactly your standard procedure Chunin exam. Seriously, there wouldn't be any shinobi left if they all had to fight an S-class missing nin just so they could advance to Chunin level. But apparently, it happened every now and then. It had happened to the former Team 7 and now it was about to happen to some poor genin team. Too bad for them, but that's just how life was sometimes. After a few minutes of nervous waiting, the 2 Chunin got into position on both sides of the gate, indicating that there was only 1 minute left before the second phase of the exam started. Almost immediately both Naruto and Kyūbi attached the bells to their outfits, leaving them dangling on their belts. So, should we try and set a new record, Naru-kun? Kyūbi grinned mischievously as they both prepared themselves. You still need to ask, he replied with an equally big grin. They'd heard that Gaara had been the one to set the previous record. Needless to say that Naruto was extremely competitive about everything that concerned a record or limit or anything. If he got the chance, he'd always try to beat it and place his own mark in history. Ready? One of the Chunin shouted, causing the two members of Team Namikaze to drop into their stances. Go! He shouted, the gates swinging open at exactly the same time. Naruto and Kyūbi kicked off with everything they had, propelling themselves forward at an almost insane speed as the ground below their feet cracked loudly before shattering almost completely, throwing up a large cloud of dust as a result. Within moments the two genin had vanished without a trace, leaving behind two coughing Chunin. You just couldn't resist, could you, Q-chan? Naruto grinned at her as they raced across the trees. Che, figures you'd notice my little prank, she smiled back. Too bad that I won't be able to see their reactions though, Naruto thought as he directed his attention forward again. At the gate, the two Chunin were already moving to close the gate. Couldn't they have been a bit calmer when leaving? One of them muttered as he took in the devastated earth in front of the gate. Hey, it can't be helped, you know. He'd Konoha's #1 hyperactive shinobi, remember? True enough. Both shinobi sighed before each grabbing a part of the gate. Just at that moment, every single part of the gate seemingly fell apart, leaving the two of them standing there with just a handle in their hands. What the? One of them exclaimed as he looked at the mass of metal lying in front of them. I don't believe it, the other breathed. She actually removed every single screw out of the gate as they passed it. Both of the Chunin gulped visibly as they shifted their looks towards the forest of death, pitying those that confronted Team Namikaze. As it was, it didn't take them long to find a team to steal some bells from. Naruto almost couldn't believe it when he saw some Iwa nin running along the forest floor. They were absolutely the opposite of what a professional shinobi should be. Loud cracks echoed through the forest as the three-man team sped along, ignoring the flora around them. The leader of the group even ran straight through a few of the massive trees in the forest, bringing them down in the process. It was obvious what their strategy was. The thick rock armor they were wearing protected them while they used their speed and sheer bulk to barrel into anything that was on their path. While it was undoubtedly effective, their tactic lacked any of the typical subtlety that shinobi usually applied to combat. Typical Iwa strategy, Kyūbi sighed, those guys are completely relying on their armor to keep them safe. They're a disgrace. Naruto could only agree. Even if he was loudmouthed and hyperactive at times, even he understood the basic principles of shinobi combat. Trickery was an essential part of any battle and these guys were completely ignoring that principle. Hey Q-chan, let's go teach these guys a lesson, he grinned before quickly changing directions so that he would eventually get in front of them. Kyūbi caught on instantly and followed him. Tadayoshi, status, the leader of the Iwa genin shouted at his teammate. Still nothing, sir, he replied. Since he had the best chakra sense of their group, he had been assigned the duty of trying to find anyone that entered his range. Not that it was really necessary. Most people would come to investigate all the ruckus they were creating. It was something inherent to most shinobi. They didn't have to be afraid though. It would take an A-ranked jutsu to penetrate their armor, so an ambush would be practically ineffective. After that, they would simply need to shift their course and up their speed, transforming them into a human battering ram. At full speed, they could even plow their way through a village wall, except that of Iwa, of course. Alright, we'll continue on for another hour, their leader decided. After that we'll dig in and rest for 5 hours before we begin again. Yes sir, both of his teammates shouted immediately. Just as their leader shifted his attention forward again, two blurs crashed down into the earth about 100 meters in front of them. Excellent, he thought as he signaled his teammates. As the dust cleared a bit, he noticed something rather disturbing though. One of the silhouettes he was seeing in the dust had a few more appendages than normal. Almost instantly he recognized Kyūbi. Heads up people, that's Team Namikaze, he shouted. He too didn't believe it that Naruto was actually the son of the Yellow Flash and that his teammate was the Kyūbi no Kitsune, but still, he had to admit that they were powerful. They had demonstrated that fact at the beginning of the first test. It didn't matter if the team they had defeated had been one of the weakest genin squads in Iowa, it took a decent amount of strength to smash someone into a wall like that. His two teammates quickly moved into formation, creating a wedge with their leader as its tip. As one, they stormed straight at the Namakazes. "Can I?" Kyūbi asked as she watched the formation of three juggernauts close in. "Sure. Go ahead," Naruto smiled, "but don't kill them, okay? I know. These are just the exams, so no need to kill anyone." As she said this, Kyūbi cracked her knuckles. It had been a while since she had been able to let loose. Suppressing a grin, she held out her hand, pointing it at the three incoming nin. She simply stood there as the group of Iowa nin collided with her, the collision creating a localized earthquake. You guys aren't too bad in terms of strength and attack power," Kyūbi grinned at them. Meanwhile, the three Iowa nin had stupefied looks on their faces. Their charge had been stopped by Kyūbi, with a single hand. "So, is that all?" She smiled right before she removed her hand, causing the three nin to fall forward. They'd still been putting on pressure even after they had stopped. Using their momentum to her advantage, she moved below the leader of the group and smashed her elbow right into his stomach, shattering the front armor of all three nin. What followed was three genin flying through the air. With a grimace, they all braced for impact as they saw a few trees closing in rather fast. They never reached them though. After having sent the trio flying, Kyūbi had followed right after them. Their eyes widened as she appeared right in their path. They didn't get much time to be surprised though. In a blur, she executed a roundhouse kick at their backs, blowing away the rest of their armor. This time, they did crash into some trees. With a smile, Kyūbi walked towards the trio of fallen nin and picked up a bell. "Was it fun?" Naruto grinned as he watched Kyūbi move back towards him. He'd been watching her with quite a bit of interest. She simply looked stunning whenever she was fighting, and seeing her fight from a distance was even more enjoyable than watching her fight him during sparring. "Too easy," she simply replied. "Well, you can't exactly expert every genin to be at our level, remember?" "True enough," she shrugged, "but what's with that look on your face, Naru-kun?" Naruto blushed. He couldn't help it. Kyūbi was simply so cute when fighting, or when having fun. Most of the time, the two coincided. "Oh, I see," she grinned mischievously, "you were watching me fight, weren't you?" She closed in on Naruto, a smile on her face. Just as she moved in to kiss him, however, the earth nearby started rising upwards, causing both Naruto and Kyūbi to turn their heads in the direction of the disturbance. Kisame was not having a pleasant time. Sharks lived in water, for crying out loud, not under the earth. Still, when Itachi asked, he had no other option than to obey. He knew well enough what his partner could do if you irritated him. And thus, he was left with no other alternative than to dig. Taking a look at the map of Konoha, he figured that they should be underneath the Forest of Death by now. Not that he really needed to look at the map though, the massive amount of roots that he needed to dig through had already made it obvious. With a satisfied sigh, he began to dig upwards. As soon as there was only a thin layer of earth left, he signaled Itachi. They had agreed that he be the first one out of the hole, just in case. His Sharingan gave him a distinct advantage at reacting to any possible ambush. Naruto let out a low growl as he noticed a certain Uchiha's head coming out of the hole. Kyūbi mimicked his reaction, though for a different reason altogether. She was just irritated because her moment with Naruto had been interrupted. Itachi's eyes widened as he turned his head in the direction of the growls. Instantly he recognized the situation he was in and decided to act accordingly. There was only one thing he could do when faced with the two Namakazes while they're having an intimate moment. I seem to be interrupting something. My apologies, he said before looking down into the hole, Kisame, reverse digging direction. Within second the head had disappeared underground again, leaving two confused genin standing on the forest floor. All the while faint mutters could be heard coming from underground. Okay, that was weird, Naruto stated as he looked suspiciously at the place where the Akatsuki members had gone back underground. Not really, Kyūbi replied, he did something similar when I saw him on the village wall. Now, where were we? With a seductive smile on her face, Kyūbi slowly wrapped Naruto in her arms again before kissing him. Kakashi-sensei, Sakura shouted as she walked into the proctor room. Since they couldn't exactly interfere with the exam during the second phase, most of the supervisors simply went to the tower located at the center of the Forest of Death where they could discuss about the genin taking the exam and generally random stuff, though it wasn't uncommon for the proctors to bet on the different teams. This year though, there wasn't exactly much use for betting. Just about anyone knew that a member from Team Namikaze would win the final exam. How many times have I told you that it's not sensei anymore, or equals now remember? Kakashi sighed as he started reading a certain orange book again. I do remember, but it still feels so weird to call you anything but that, Sakura replied, fervently trying to ignore the book in her former teacher's hands. Eventually, even her patience ran out. Just so you know, sensei, Team Namikaze has arrived at the tower. Kakashi did a double take at that. He'd been warned by Jiraiya about her and the opinion she had about any perverts she could find. He knew that if he was caught reading a certain bit of literature, he'd suffer some rather painful consequences. In a flash the small book had vanished seemingly into thin air, and only just in time. Kakashi-sensei, Naruto shouted as he barged into the room, Kyūbi following him closely. She eyed his hand, which was still smoking a bit from the amount of friction he had generated when putting the book away at extreme speeds, but she decided to ignore that and simply moved towards Sakura to start up a conversation about the first thing that came to mind. Meanwhile, Naruto was being his usual hyperactive self. It didn't matter if he had calmed down quite a bit over the years, that didn't mean that he stopped having his moments. He was almost literally bouncing off the walls when he announced to Kakashi that they had beaten Gaara's record by well over half an hour. Is it just me or has Naruto not calmed down in the slightest during all those years? Sakura sighed deeply as she watched her former teammates' antics. He has calmed down, Kyūbi grinned, or rather, he's learned to control his energy a bit better. Though it still gets the best of him sometimes. Calm down, Naruto. Kakashi tried to calm the overexcited genin. We know you beat the record, and we're happy for you. But actually, you're not really allowed to be here. Naruto froze when hearing those words. But why? I mean, you're here and so is Sakura, he protested. I know that, but this room is only for the supervisors of the Chunin exam, Kakashi explained. I believe you've been assigned rooms where you can spend the remaining time of the second part of the exam, right? I suggest that you go there and try to get some rest. Don't worry, you'll see us around. With a pout, Naruto turned around. Alright, I'll see you later then, Kakashi-sensei. Sakura, he said as he walked out the door, Kyūbi following him after having said goodbye to Sakura. You know, Kakashi-sensei, that was a bit mean. Sakura turned to the Junin. I'm not denying that, but at the same time it was the best way to get Naruto out of here in a hurry, Kakashi replied. He could have gotten into some big trouble by simply barging in here. He was lucky actually that we were the only ones here. Had it been another proctor, one that's not so friendly with him, they'd have disqualified him on the spot. I see, Sakura sighed as she looked at the door. She understood that sometimes the best way to help someone was to be somewhat strict with that person. Kakashi had applied that method before, and it worked. As the second phase of the exam progressed, so did Naruto's impatience. Last time he'd been one of the last to arrive, having spent almost the entire allotted time in the forest. This time, the situation had been reversed and they were forced to spend almost the entire time in the tower. Thus, Naruto had been stuck inside for several days. Sadly enough, the combination of Naruto, indoor environments and a strict ban on training while at the tower was not exactly the best choice if you wanted some peace and quiet. "Ah, I'm so bored," he exclaimed as he threw himself onto the bed in his and Kyūbi's room. He'd spent the entire day running around the tower, exploring every single bit of the massive structure and placing a certain object here, rearranging something there and so on. "You're bored again?" Kyūbi replied in shock as she walked out of the shower, wearing nothing but her nightclothes. "But didn't you place booby traps all over the tower?" "Yeah, but I'll have to wait until tomorrow before they go are activated," he growled in disappointment. While he knew that he had to be patient when playing a prank, he still had some difficulty in suppressing the excitement that came with it. The fact that he'd have to wait until the next day when the second phase of the exam would come to an end only served to worsen that. He'd never been forced to wait this long when playing a prank. Still, he couldn't risk being disqualified for that reason, so he had timed them to activate well after the second phase ended. After that they would be free to spend a month as they wanted so that they could prepare for the final phase. During that time, they wouldn't be able to disqualify him. "Just be patient, Naru-kun," she smiled as she watched the object of her affections look at the ceiling. Noticing that he was currently pondering about something, a mischievous smile spread across her face. Silently, she crouched down onto the ground and sneaked towards the bed. "Ack!" Naruto shouted when he suddenly felt something land on his chest. Without warning, Kyūbi had pounced him while he was lying on the bed. "You know, Naru-kun," Kyūbi smiled, "you still have me to play with, remember?" Naruto blushed brightly when he noticed how little she was wearing. True, she wore nothing but a t-shirt every single night, but it was still a bit hard to get used to, especially after having closed himself off from any attempts from Jiraiya to get him hooked up with a girl. It had become so bad that he simply detested anything perverted. Of course, given the current relationship he had with Kyūbi, he was having a decidedly odd response to everything she did. Besides the obvious physical attraction that he felt, both because of the seal she'd put on him and his own feelings, there was also the fact that he'd fallen in love with her. Opposed to that was his own mindset that considered everything of that nature to be bad. He'd been working hard on overcoming that ingrained habit, but it was still slow going. Even so, he had to be careful. While he knew that he'd never be attracted to another woman besides Kyūbi, he didn't want to become a lecherous pervert like Ero Sennin. Kyūbi, however, didn't exactly give him much choice. She had slowly started tugging on the hem of his shirt and was now trying to get him to take it off. He took one look at her eyes and instantly knew where they would end up if this continued. Ignoring the small voice in the back of his mind, he put on the brakes. He put his arms around her waist and pulled her close. "Not yet, Q-chan," he whispered in her ear. Kyūbi didn't reply as she watched Naruto pick her up and place her onto the mattress. "I'm going to take a shower," he said and walked into an adjoining bathroom. "Looks like he's still struggling," Kyūbi said to herself as she heard Naruto turn on the shower. "Looks like I'll have to be a bit more forceful next time. It's that or wait for at least half a year. I'm not going to get anything out of him tonight though." With a sigh, she laid down onto the bed and closed her eyes. In no time, she had fallen asleep and didn't even wake up when Naruto crawled into the bed, though she did pull him close to her. It was as if she knew whenever he was close to her. The next morning both of them woke up rather early. The second phase of the exam would end soon and they were expected to be at the assembly in the main arena in the tower. With a slight grumble, Kyūbi got up. Almost instantly she missed the warmth that came with laying on Naruto's chest. "Come on, Naru-kun," she poked his sides in an attempt to wake him. It didn't happen often that she awoke before he did, but it occurred from time to time. When he didn't awake from the incessant poking though, she frowned. Usually a simple poke was enough to wake him up, but it seemed he'd built up a resistance of sorts. She decided to change tactics. Naru-kun, she whispered as she moved back towards him before gently kissing him. Within moments his eyes had opened at the soft touch of her lips. Good morning to you too, Q-chan, he murmured, his hands moving towards her hips. With a smile on her face, Kyūbi jumped up from the bed, evading his attempt at a hug. Come on, she grinned, time to get up. They're expecting up at the arena today, remember? That phrase seemed to penetrate through Naruto's skull, for he jolted upright and started moving through the room at high speeds in an attempt to get on his clothes and have breakfast at the same time. Relax, Kyūbi smiled as she watched him hop through the room, we still have time. This seemed to calm him down a bit. He looked at the clock and noticed that they had well over half an hour remaining. Sheesh. Don't scare me like that, I thought we were going to be late, he muttered as he moved towards the bathroom to get a decent shower. Congratulations you all on passing the second phase of the Chunin exam, Tsunade announced at the group of genin standing before her. As she continued her speech about the purpose of the third and final exam, Naruto took a close look at the remaining teams. The previous time he'd been here there had been 7 teams to pass the second phase. Right now though, there were 15 times that had passed, Team Namikaze not included. All in all 16 teams that passed, Kyūbi thought. Looks like Kakashi's idea of using the bells wasn't that good. Still, it's an obsession of his, so I guess it can't be helped. Even so, more than double the amount of teams passed this time compared to the last time we were here. Guess it's going to be prelims again, Naruto whispered to Kyūbi. No doubt about that, she replied. Hey, Team Namikaze, shut up there, I'm trying to explain some things. Tsunade's voice suddenly rang through the arena, startling the genin. Sorry, both of them replied at the same time, though the look on their faces indicated something different altogether. Ahem, Tsunade continued, as I was saying. Since we have a bit too many applicants this year. She shot a dark look at Kakashi, who simply tried to look as innocent as possible, not an easy task when only a single eye is available. We'll need to hold some preliminaries. 2 names will be randomly selected and displayed on the screen on the wall. Those selected will fight until one of you is either knocked unconscious, killed, or when the proctor supervising the fights decides it's over. But we just got out of the forest last night, a nin from AIM exclaimed. Tough luck, mister, Naruto replied before Tsunade even got a chance to say anything. It was like this the last time I was here. Me and my team had only half an hour to rest up that time, and 2 of us still managed to pass and go to the third part of the exam, so quit complaining. Thank you for clearing that up, Naruto, Tsunade grinned at the blonde before moving on. From now on you all work separately. Anything you do will not influence your team, so if there are any that wish to quit, now is your chance. Tsunade waited for a few moments but was satisfied to see that no one quit this time, unlike the mess of the year before when the exam had been held in Suna. Apparently half the applicants had quit simply because of Gaara's presence there. During his reign as the Case Cage, he'd built up quite the reputation and as such was feared by just about everyone that wasn't an ally. Alright then, display the first 2 names, she ordered. The genin visibly stiffened as names started flickering on and off the screen. When they finally stopped, the reactions were quite varied. The AIM nin from earlier froze in fear while both his teammates placed their hands on his shoulders in an attempt to comfort him. The rest of the teams, however, breathed a sigh of relief, while Kyūbi grinned broadly. The 2 names on the display were Namikaze. Kyūbi versus Yoshioka Makoto. Can I still quit this exam? The AIM nin asked sheepishly. Oh come on you big baby, Kyūbi growled as she grabbed him by his collar and forcibly dragged him towards the arena. It's not like I'm going to kill you. Heck, I won't even give you any permanent damage, so quit whining. With a final shove, she pushed the nin forward, making sure he was standing in front of her. A raised eyebrow firmly keeping him from bolting out of the ring. Meanwhile, all the other shinobi had moved onto the walkways on either side of the ring, eager to get a look at the fighting skills of a certain demon fox. The fact that the aim nin was her opponent only vaguely registered with everyone else but his teammates. They were praying for the safety of their friend. They didn't exactly trust Kyūbi not to kill him. What would you expect from a demon fox? Don't you dare lose, Q-chan, Naruto shouted as he walked up the stairs, receiving a thumbs up in response, though it was one quite less blinding as a standard Lee-style thumbs up. As he moved onto the walkway, he was quickly joined by Sasuke and Sakura. Are you ready? Kakashi said the moment the last person cleared the arena. Right then, begin. He jumped back quickly to avoid getting caught in anything Kyūbi might throw at the aim nin. The fact that he was taking this seriously showed as he pulled up his headband, revealing the Sharingan in the process. Instant popcorn no jutsu, Sasuke shouted as he formed a series of 7 hand seals. Almost instantly a big bucket filled to the brim with popcorn appeared in his hands, much to Naruto's amazement. I knew this technique was going to come in handy one day. Sasuke grinned as he took a large handful and started munching happily on the snack he'd just made appear. Where the hell did you learn to do that? Naruto asked as he kept staring at the food in Sasuke's hands. Oh, this. I copied it off of Orochimaru when he was watching some of his experiments fight each other. Turns out that he's got quite the collection of useful jutsu. I thought it was handy at the time. Besides, it doesn't take any effort to copy something. Oi, are you going to discuss jutsu all day, Naru-kun, or are you actually going to watch my fight? Kyūbi shouted up at the spectators' gallery. Her sensitive ears had picked up the casual conversation and she wasn't exactly pleased that her Naruto wasn't watching. Sorry, Q-chan. Naruto grinned as he quickly shifted his attention towards the arena, but not before grabbing a big handful out of Sasuke's popcorn bucket, much to the Uchiha's dismay. Even after 5 years, he still didn't like to share some things with other people. Right then, Kyūbi smiled gleefully, back to business. In all of his 16 years of life, never had Yoshioka Makoto felt such fear. Then again, never before had he been in such a situation, for standing right in front of him was the legendary demon fox, Kyūbi no Kitsune. Or rather, Namikaze Kyūbi. Still, he was a shinobi from a megakure. He wasn't about to cower in front of an enemy, no matter how fearsome said enemy was. Besides, he had his honor to defend. He had been sent here as one of the top genin of a megakure, so he should behave as such. Besides, even if he was faced with the legendary Kyūbi, he knew that she should be severely weakened if she was in human form. There was no way that she still had all her power available to her in such a small state. With his resolve firmly in place, he began his technique. Nami Shindo no Jutsu, he shouted, finishing a series of hand seals. Smart move, Kyūbi commented as she watched a wall of water of about 6 feet high spring up in front of the aim nin and move towards her, using a water technique against someone that is a fire user. Quickly she jumped out of the way as the wave came crashing down. Her opponent had already started another technique though. Suigaden no Jutsu, Makoto exclaimed as he finished his next technique. His general plan of attack was to keep up the pressure until he could find an opening while not giving Kyūbi a chance to attack. He knew that one hit from her would probably mean his defeat. Kyūbi's eyes widened a bit as she watched the water from the wave launch itself towards her in the shape of small fangs. Not bad, she grimaced as the fangs impacted with her body. Ah, come on, Sasuke muttered as both his popcorn and his clothes were thoroughly drenched by resulting spray of water. Though it only took a few hand seals for him to dry his clothes and replace the popcorn. Orochimaru, he grinned as the rest of the spectators watched him enviously. Naruto on the other hand was looking intently at the arena. There wasn't any worry in his eyes though. He knew that his fox could easily survive a technique from that level. I'll give you an A for effort. Kyūbi smiled as she came falling down, landing softly on the floor. Other than a few small cuts and tears in her clothes, she was perfectly fine. Had that been an A rank technique instead of a B rank, you actually might have succeeded in scratching me. Makoto watched as Kyūbi stood there in front of him. Though she was drenched with water, she still exuded a massive aura that would strike fear in almost anyone. He swallowed heavily as he watched her standing there. He'd just used his best combination attack on her and she was just standing there, virtually unharmed. Naruto on the other hand was having a decidedly different reaction as he watched her. To him, Kyūbi simply looked incredibly as she stood there, her long red hair clinging to her body and her crimson eyes shining because of the water reflecting the light of the lamps overhead. Time to finish this, I guess. Kyūbi smiled as she stretched a bit before raising her right hand. Don't even bother to try, Sasuke. Naruto grinned as he noticed that his raven-haired friend had his Sharingan activated. Without a doubt he'd copied the AIM Nin's earlier techniques, but it looked like he was going to try and copy Kyūbi's as well. That's Foxfire that she's going to use, something that we humans can't even create a spark of. That and the chakra requirements for it are insane. You wouldn't even have a chance of using it because of that reason alone, he continued explaining, though he did frown a bit as he watched Kyūbi perform the technique. Grumbling, Sasuke shut down his Sharingan again and simply stared at the fight. As Naruto spoke, a small ball or orange fire appeared, hovering less than an inch above Kyūbi's palm. Yoshioka's eyes widened as he saw Kyūbi's technique. Being a water-type shinobi, he knew just about as much as he could about fire and earth types, the ones he was strong and weak against. Normally he shouldn't have any trouble at all in dealing with a mere fireball, but here he was seeing something completely different. It took him less than a second to realize that this fire was anything but normal. Even his biggest wall of water wouldn't save him once she decided to throw that at him. He didn't even need Naruto's explanation that it was Foxfire to know that. I give up, he said quickly, not wanting to give Kyūbi a chance to begin her attack, not that she was actually doing something at the moment. She was simply standing there, casually throwing the ball of fire up into the air a bit before catching it as it came back down. Winner, Namikaze Kyūbi, Kakashi announced as the defeated AIM Nin went to stand next to his teammates. While he had been defeated, he was allowed to stay since he hadn't been injured. Smiling, Kyūbi went up to the spectators' gallery as well, moving to where Naruto was currently grinning widely as he watched her approach. She did pause for a moment when she passed the AIM Nin. Don't worry, you're definitely Chunin material. The next time you come here you'll pass, she said softly so that only he could hear her, before moving away. Yoshioka stared at her as she walked towards Naruto. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. Besides getting out of a fight with Kyūbi without even getting a single scratch, which was pretty unbelievable by itself, he had just received some comforting words from the demon fox herself. Almost instantly, his brain shut down, the shock of what he had just heard finally getting through to his brain. Meanwhile, Kyūbi was muttering to herself a bit. Damn, that was soft of me. Naru-kun must be rubbing off on me, she mused as she approached said shinobi and his friends. Ah, and here I was hoping to see some real action, Sasuke muttered as he made the popcorn vanish into thin air. Since there was little hope of seeing a decent fight now, he figured that there was no need to stuff himself with popcorn. It wasn't fun to eat that stuff when there wasn't something exciting going on. He even thought that it lost most of its taste when eaten casually, and as a Uchiha, he only wanted the best, well, more or less. Quit complaining, Sasuke, Naruto replied. If she had thrown that ball of foxfire, she'd have blasted away half the tower. Now I'm pretty sure that we could survive it, but my guess is that anyone below Junin or Tokubetsu Junin rank wouldn't. Sasuke swallowed heavily as he heard this. While he specialized mostly in fire and lightning techniques, he still hadn't been able to do that much damage with that little fire. Well, I guess that it would be comparable to your brother's Amaterasu, only stronger, Naruto continued. He'd seen both of the techniques in action, and knew what they could do. What? Sasuke shouted as he heard this. That's impossible. Amaterasu burns until the target is completely devoid of chakra. There's no fire that could possibly be more powerful. Q-chan's foxfire burns for as long as she wants it to burn, and it's a lot more destructive too. Naruto shrugged before turning to Kyūbi to congratulate her on her victory, leaving Sasuke to stand there, mouth hanging wide open. While Kyūbi had been the first to fight, Naruto's turn didn't come until about 3/4 of the participants had finished their preliminary matches. While there had been some rather flashy fights, none could really compare to the one between Gaara and Lee that they'd seen during their first time on the exam. That combined with the fact that Naruto, Kyūbi, Sasuke and Sakura were more or less used to seeing high-level techniques being used with little or no time in between made sure that, when Naruto's turn finally came, both he and Kyūbi were bored out of their minds. Sure, they hadn't been as strong their first time in the exam, but still, that exam had been a lot more spectacular than this one. His opponent's name didn't even register with Naruto as he walked down to the arena. He was now extremely bored and anxious to get out of the tower. You're going down here, Namikaze, his opponent, an Iwa Nin, shouted. I'll make sure that there won't be a second yellow flash for Konoha. Naruto sighed as he readied himself. There was little doubt that now that the word was out, he'd get quite a bit of assassins after him, probably most of them from Iwa. They still hated Yondaimi's guts. While this genin wasn't even a threat, it still annoyed him to know that some people couldn't let go of their hate, even after so many years. Mere moments after Kakashi had started the match, the Iwa Nin was planted halfway into the statue standing at the end of the room. He'd tried to use the same armor as the Nin in the forest. This had been his luck though, it had saved him from a rather severe skull fracture. Though, as it was, he still had a concussion from slamming into the wall when his technique hadn't been completed yet. Even though I'm the Yondaimi's son, I will never be the Yellow Flash. That's my father's title, and I refuse to carry it. If I have a title, it'll be one that I earned by my own strength, Naruto said as he turned around and moved to leave the tower, Kyūbi appearing at his side in a flash of bright fire. Oh, and Tsunade-ba-chan, let me know the final matchups okay, he smiled as he turned around. Tsunade sighed as she watched the blonde and red-haired shinobi leave the arena. She couldn't really keep them here, as they were free to go wherever they liked after passing the exam. Still, she couldn't help but rest her forehead in the palm of her hand when he announced his feelings about his father's title. It was typical of him to do something like that. He'd earned everything he had in his life through his own hard work. To have something as a title given to him simply by being born to someone important was something he detested. According to him, that was the reason the Uchiha had fallen and why there was such an internal strife with the Hyuga. I wonder what your title will be, Naruto, Tsunade smiled. She had no idea of what it would be, but she couldn't help taking a few wild guesses. Arg, that was boring, Naruto shouted in frustration as he walked out of the tower. Normally the finalists would be escorted out of the training area when everyone had finished their matches, but someone like himself and Kyūbi wouldn't need an escort. True, Kyūbi agreed wholeheartedly, but you know, there's no one in the forest right now, and it's a training ground. Naruto's grin almost reached his ears as he turned around to look at Kyūbi, who was looking at him with an equally wide grin. Less than a minute later, the entire forest shook with explosions and impacts as the two of them started sparring again. Almost an hour later, Kakashi and several other Junin reached the site of their battle, the broken tree stumps and craters a silent reminder of what had happened there earlier. What in the world could create this much destruction in such a short amount of time? One of the Junin mumbled as he examined one particularly badly scorched tree stump. Only a few people that I know could do this, and only 3 of those were here today, Kakashi said softly as he looked around the now open part of the forest. An area of at least 50 meters wide had been completely leveled, with the surrounding woods having taken a severe punishment. And of those 3, there was one that was with us all the time. So that leaves only 2 people, both of who happened to leave the tower at exactly the same time. Are you saying that this was done by the Naruto and Kyūbi? The Junin asked, surprise in his voice. While the villagers still hated Kyūbi, the announcement that Naruto was actually Yondaimi's son had done much to quell the anger of the adults in the village. That and the fear of Kyūbi retaliating kept most of them at bay. Still, the couple's official name being Namikaze had created quite a bit of confusion about how they should call them. While the villagers didn't want to call them Namikazes, to call them something else would possibly be considered as slandering to the Namikaze name. Something that the villagers didn't want either. So most of them settled for using the first names of the 2. While it was a bit hypocritical, it was still an improvement over the insults that Naruto had received earlier in his life. That's exactly what I'm saying. Those 2 are probably the most powerful shinobi in our village right now. I don't think even Tsunade can take them on, Kakashi replied. Come on, let's go. No use in staying here. Taking one last look at the devastation, the Junin turned and followed Kakashi as he disappeared in a swirl of leaves. So, what do you think of the opposition? Naruto asked as he and Kyūbi entered their apartment, casually waving at the landlady who still couldn't really believe that the Yondaimi's son and Kyūbi no Kitsune were actually living in her building. Still, she didn't really mind. She had always liked Minato and his wife, and Kyūbi and Naruto were surprisingly similar to them, even to the point where it was almost scary. Well, they're just about standard Chunin level. Not bad compared to the average genin, but nothing like the nin during the first time. Well, you can't exactly call Gaara, Lee, Neji and Sasuke normal, right? Naruto grinned. You're forgetting yourself, Naru-kun, Kyūbi smiled. I'm not that special, he said sheepishly. This however earned him a quick jab on the head from Kyūbi. Nothing special. I think you're the only one in this whole village that can take me on while I'm in human form and come out on top, and you call yourself nothing special, she huffed. Fine, then I'm a bit special, he said quickly. He wasn't exactly eager to irritate the redhead now standing right in front of him. Even though Kyūbi was a bit smaller than he was, she could still have a threatening presence, one that clearly indicated that a certain redhead was not to be messed with. Good, as long as you understand that it's fine, she smiled before leaning forward and kissing him. Naruto stiffened as he felt her lips moving lightly on his own, nibbling slightly at his own. He'd been caught completely by surprise, but he recovered quickly enough. He moved his arms around Kyūbi, pulling her close to him. Not wanting to show their landlady the little scene, he quickly kicked the door closed after moving through it without ever breaking the kiss. When they finally pulled apart after several seconds of spending the time kissing each other, Naruto stared at her with a gentle look in his face. Her cheeks were flushed, her lips slightly parted. He swallowed as he looked up at her eyes, those red pools that almost seemed to draw him in with their unearthly color. He could feel her heart beating rapidly against his chest, her breathing rapid and shallow. Her eyes seemed to darken a bit as she dragged his mouth back to her, wasting no time at all with deepening the kiss. Naruto was taken aback by her sudden aggressiveness. The redhead in front of him was clearly extremely excited for some reason. His worries, however, faded the moment he felt her tongue parting his lips. He groaned as he dragged one hand through her hair, the other unconsciously cupping her bottom and gently putting some pressure on it. Kyūbi's eyes flew open the moment she felt Naruto's hand on her butt. She'd been craving for a bit of intimacy. Ever since Naruto had told her that he loved her, she'd been eagerly anticipating the more private moments between the two of them. Naruto, however, didn't exactly have that much experience with females, so she was left with no other option than to take the initiative herself. But while she had planned on spending some quality time with Naruto, she hadn't counted on this. She didn't mind though. She locked her gaze with Naruto's, staring deeply into his blue eyes. They pulled apart again for a few moments, before his eyes darkened a bit as well and he kissed her again. Naru, she breathed just before his mouth covered hers and she was left no other option than to return the kiss. Kyūbi was feeling unlike she had ever felt before. While she felt some desire whenever she was with Naruto, this was completely different. She felt as if her body was on fire everywhere he touched her body. She felt herself ache with the need to feel him as closely as possible. Deciding to give in to it, she pulled Naruto even closer until his body was molded almost perfectly against hers. While one hand went up to grab some of his hair, the other slowly moved under his shirt. Naruto shivered when he felt Kyūbi's hands slide gently over his bare back. Somewhere in the back of his mind he knew that he should stop, but he ignored it. He felt as if he was on fire, adrenaline coursing through his entire body, his heart pounding in his chest as Kyūbi pulled him even closer, her pressing fully against him while they kissed. Vaguely, Naruto felt that he too was getting more excited as time progressed. Neither of them really knew when or how they ended up in the bedroom, but they didn't care. Their focus was directed at one person, and one person only. Not a word was spoken between them as they crashed onto the bed, not letting go of each other for even the slightest moment. Even through the haze of her own excitement, Kyūbi still had the reason of mind to stop some of her more basic instincts. Instead of just ripping off Naruto's shirt, she began tugging on the edge of it, pulling it upwards until it got stuck under his arms. "Lift your arms, Naruto," she whispered in his ear after she broke their kiss for a moment again. Doing as Kyūbi directed him, Naruto raised his arms, letting go of her just for the time that was needed to pull the shirt over his head. Right after she'd thrown it away in some corner, he instantly started placing kisses from her mouth, moving slowly downwards from her jaw to her neck. She gasped as she felt Naruto's lips brush over her skin, her own hands moving randomly across his back as her mind started to fall apart from the pleasure and arousal that she was feeling. Kyūbi moaned as Naruto carefully started moving his own hands under her shirt until he decided to take it off her. Kyūbi's mind was still being bombarded with pleasure when she felt the rustle of cloth over her skin, immediately followed by a cooler breeze as her shirt joined Naruto's on the ground. Only moments after she felt the coolness of the air, it was replaced by the warmth of the blonde's hands moving gently over her body, causing even more moans to escape from her mouth. Naruto swallowed heavily as he regained some of his senses. Lying in front of him on the bed was Kyūbi, her shirt removed and her bra the only thing keeping her from being completely topless. While he had seen her before, that had always been by chance or some random event. This time, however, he had been the one to take off her shirt while they had been kissing. The feeling of desire that he was currently having, the excitement, all of it, was completely new to him. He hesitated, pulling back a bit as the voice in the back of his head grew a bit stronger. Kyūbi growled lightly at the lack of stimulation and brusquely yanked Naruto back towards her. She could clearly feel how excited he was. There wasn't much he could do to hide it when he was as close to Kyūbi as they were. While Naruto started kissing and touching her again, it wasn't enough, at least not for her. After a few moments' thought, she grabbed the hand currently roaming across her back, gently guiding it towards her chest. A shock coursed through her body as his hand made contact with her. Even through the fabric of the bra she was wearing, she could still feel the warmth of his hands as they moved. Still holding on to his hand, Kyūbi began guiding it, slowly moving it over from one to the other, and back again, constantly changing the path to somewhere he hadn't touched before until she felt him take the initiative. As she let go of his hand, she surrendered her mind to the pleasure she was feeling. Naruto's breath hitched as he saw Kyūbi put his hand directly onto her, moving it around, guiding him. His mind almost stopped working as he felt their softness under his hand, and before long, he had started moving his hand on his own, kissing Kyūbi deeply as he gently started kneading her. Kyūbi's eyes flew open when suddenly the soft pressure on her disappeared and was replaced by two hands on her back, moving towards the clasp of her bra. She moved closer to Naruto, turning so he could reach there more easily, and was rewarded by him undoing the clasp the moment his hands reached it. Before he could completely take it off though, she flipped him onto his back, straddling him. His eyes widened a bit as her bra slowly slid off before it too was thrown onto the ground. He didn't get much time to appreciate the view. Only moments after he'd been pushed onto his back, Kyūbi kissed him again, but this time, she started moving lower and lower, trailing across his chest and stomach, until she had reached his pants. Kyūbi, Naruto gasped as she first gently rubbed over the bulge that had formed in his pants before she slipped her hand between his skin and the edge of his boxers and grasped him. Naruto felt as if he was on cloud nine. Never before in his life had he had such a sensation. Sure, he'd masturbated every now and then, but this was something different altogether. Kyūbi smiled seductively as she moved back up again, her hand continuing to massage him as she kissed him deeply. Naruto's brain almost exploded with pleasure as Kyūbi continued her ministrations, and he was barely aware of it when they rolled back onto their sides, Kyūbi's hand still deep in his boxers. Clouded by pleasure, his own hands started moving again even as Kyūbi kissed him deeply, their tongues battling for supremacy. Kyūbi let out a sudden moan when she suddenly felt one of Naruto's hands slide downwards, his thumb hooking in the hem of her trousers. Without hesitation, she lifted her hips and felt him tug her pants down. An pleasant ache came from deep between her legs as her damp panties were pulled down together with the rest of her clothing. She moaned again as she rolled over onto her back, completely surrendering herself to Naruto as his hand got rid of the clothes and moved back onto her body. Agonizingly slow, his hand made its way up the inside of her thighs, her pleasure building with every centimeter he advanced. The shock she felt when it finally reached between her legs was indescribable. She felt a gentle tickle as it moved through her curls before descending onto her. Their hearts beat in their chests as both of them experienced feelings none of them had ever had before. Even as Naruto gently moved his hand across her opening, she kept her own hand moving until finally deciding to remove Naruto's pants as well. Their bodies felt as if they were on fire as they laid on the bed, each gently pleasuring the other, and enjoying every second of it. Kyūbi couldn't help but shudder when she felt Naruto gently probe around her opening, spreading her folds and stroking her before he slowly inserted his finger. Her back arched even as all the muscles in her lower body seemed to contract at the same time. Her hands grabbed the sheets of the bed as she felt the pleasure building inside of her as Naruto slowly started thrusting his finger in and out. Her moans quickly became nothing more than garbled sounds as her hips reflexively started thrusting in time with Naruto. Meanwhile, Naruto was also holding on. He had started focusing completely on Kyūbi in order to keep his mind and pleasure from exploding. Kyūbi's hand, though, made that quite difficult as she began moving faster and faster. Just as he was about to let go, he felt Kyūbi's insides tighten around his finger. Without thinking, he pushed his finger in as far as he could. He let go of the hold on his pleasure just as he heard Kyūbi's scream echo through the room. Kyūbi smiled as she watched Naruto, their eyes gazing at the other. Both of them exhausted from their earlier activities. Without another word, she snuggled against his bare chest, falling asleep almost instantly, unaware that Naruto had followed her mere moments after she had closed her eyes. Chapter 8. As Kyūbi woke up, a huge grin formed on her face as she recalled the events from the previous night. While they hadn't really progressed as far as she would have wanted, it was still a massive victory for her. Admitted, it had been mostly unplanned, but most of the time this kind of thing wasn't. At least, that's what she had read in a copy of Ika Ika Paradise that she'd subtly nicked from Kakashi's hip pouch. She needed the information just in case something happened, that way she'd actually be able to really do something instead of simply laying there without having a single idea of what to do. Not that you could call Jiraiya's sorry excuse for literature that reliable, but she had to admit that he was right on some points. While she had planned on spending a bit of quality time with Naruto, she hadn't expected that it would go this far. Apparently both she and Naruto had quite the amount of pent-up emotions from the second phase of the Chunin exam, and that one kiss she'd given him when they'd gotten back home had apparently shaken things up a bit, causing all of their emotions to simply spill out in one go. She blushed as she noticed that she was completely laying next to an equally Naruto. Sure, she'd flaunted with her body a few times before, but this was the first time anyone had been this intimate with her. Of course, Naruto was the first person she actually loved, so that wasn't exactly surprising. Taking a look at the clock, she noticed that it already was way past noon. She blushed even more as her stomach grumbled loudly. Taking a quick look, she was glad to see that Naruto hadn't woken up because of the sound. Still, she realized that he would wake up soon, and that he'd be hungry as well. Something she was determined to do something about. Without waking up Naruto, she slipped out of his loving embrace, put on her clothes and went out. Naruto woke up as some rather appetizing smells made their way into his nose. He groggily sat up in the bed, wondering where his clothes were. Until he too recalled the events from the evening before. Oh crap, did I really do that? He shuddered. Tsunade Ba-chan is so going to kill me if she ever finds out. Still, what was done, was done. And at least Kyūbi had looked like she hadn't minded last night. Still, he was on his guard as he moved out of the bedroom and into the kitchen. You never knew when a frying pan would come flying towards you, intent on making a crack in your skull. What he saw in the kitchen surprised him though. Standing in front of the cooking range was Kyūbi, her tails waving happily back and forth as she juggled with the pots and pans. I never knew you could cook, he said casually as he leaned against the kitchen doorway. There's a lot you don't know about me, Naru-kun, Kyūbi said in an equally casual tone, never averting her gaze from the food she was preparing, but I would be happy to let you know everything there is to know about me. And I'm looking forward to learning from you, he chuckled as he replied in the formal manner, what are we having anyway if I may ask? Rabbit, came the reply. Naruto frowned. I don't recall having some rabbit in the fridge, where did you get it? Oh, it just wandered by, she replied, deadpan. Right, Naruto sighed. Note to self, teach Kyūbi about shops, or at least teach her that she has to use them. After a rather enjoyable meal, even though it consisted mostly of a rabbit that had been happily hopping around somewhere in Konoha, both of them went out to train. They'd already spent most of the day in bed and at the table, so they needed to catch up with some of their training. Both of them were way too hyperactive and actually had to fight or train every now and then, just to get rid of the excess energy they both had. During the month they'd gotten to hone their skills for the final exam, both of them had easily fallen back into their rhythm of spending most of their day training, though they did share more and more intimate moments as the month progressed. Still, neither of them had actually given any intention of moving forward. Not that they needed to, they were still fine with cuddling and exploring each other's bodies. The downside for their return to their normal routine was that the repair crews were once again being stressed out. Now that the pair had gotten bored of wrecking every single training ground in sight, they'd moved to outside the village. While the repair crews had initially sighed with relief, they soon noticed that they'd cheered too soon. It was true that they didn't have to repair training grounds anymore, but repairing the main gate took at least as much time and effort. Given the fact that Kyūbi and Naruto passed it at least twice a day, they were soon getting desperate again, even petitioning the Hokage for help. "Are you sure this is going to work, Itachi?" Kisame asked as he studied the sketch the Uchiha had put together. He had to admit that it had potential, but still, he wasn't too sure. "I'm absolutely certain, Kisame, but don't worry, you won't have to go into the village," Itachi replied before suddenly pulling out a hammer and a box of nails. "You just have to build it." Meanwhile, Tsunade sighed as she heard another loud crash, followed by a collective wail from the construction crews. The paperwork for the repairs was gradually piling up as Kyūbi continued her destructive habits. Still, even she didn't have the nerve to tell her on it. No one in the village had, and Naruto wasn't really keen on berating her. For as far as she'd seen, his relationship with the red-headed fox had progressed to a rather advanced stage. She knew they slept together, but also that they hadn't had, yet. Still, she knew that it was only a matter of time before that happened. A brief knock shook her out of her thoughts. "Come in," she said to the person standing on the other side of the door. She already knew who it was. After all, she was the one that had sent for him. While she somewhat appreciated the training Kyūbi was giving to the repair crews, the village still had to be secure for a possible attack, something that was quite impossible with a broken main gate. "What is it that you require, Hokage-sama?" Tenzo said respectfully to Tsunade as he entered the office, closing the door behind him. "Tenzo, I have an important mission for you, one that is critical for the village's security. To fulfill it, you'll have to work together with some villagers, so from now on you'll be working under the code name of Yamato." "I understand, Tsunade-sama. What exactly is my mission?" "You're to assist the gate construction crews. They're being overwhelmed by Kyūbi's destructive tendencies." Yamato frowned at her, not really understanding what she meant. "You want me to use my Mokudan techniques to suppress the Kyūbi, Tsunade-sama? I'm sorry, but I'm afraid that's a bit too much, even for my abilities." "I'm not asking that, Yamato. I'm simply asking that you use your Mokudan to assist the construction crews to repair the gate every time she knocks it down. That is all." "I understand, Tsunade-sama," Yamato replied before turning. Inside, he was wondering why he'd been called on to perform such a mission. His abilities could be better used, or even better, he could be training for an unexpected attack by either Orochimaru or Akatsuki. He had no idea what he was getting into. "Welcome to the final phase of the Chunin exams," Tsunade announced as she welcomed both the participating nin and the dignitaries from several countries. While most of the countries that had a nin in the final phase had either kept the Junin sensei of that particular nin or had sent a higher-ranking shinobi to review the performance, the Sand had again become the exception. Sitting in the Hokage's stand was Gaara, staring at the blonde that was currently standing all the way down in the arena. It had been a long time since he'd seen his first and best friend. But even after all these years, the blonde had changed little. In fact, the only notable difference the Kazekage noticed had been the red-headed fox queen at his side, and even so, that hadn't made the blonde change all that much. "Since you all must be eagerly anticipating both the fights and the results of the exam, we will begin the final battles right away." With this, Tsunade sat back down and let Kakashi, who was also refereeing the third and final phase of the exam, take over. "Right, the first two fighters stay here, the rest of you goes up to the waiting area over there," the silver-haired Junin said as he pointed to the small balcony where Naruto had waited the previous time as well. Naruto and Kyūbi watched with moderate interest as the first few battles erupted and finished again. While there had been a decent showing of techniques and skill, there was nothing that could really compare to what either of them could unleash. Of course, several of the nin that had already fought had shown that they had the potential of becoming Chunin, so there wouldn't be only a single person passing like last time. Luckily, both Naruto and Kyūbi had been assigned to a different part of the completion ladder so they wouldn't encounter each other until the finale. Each of them easily won their matches with a relatively modest show of skill. saving their energy for the finale. The audience, on the other hand, had been thoroughly impressed already by their showing, even if the majority of the foreigners were scared more or less shitless by Kyūbi's presence in the exams. What do you think of Team Namikaze? Kazekage-sama? Tsunade asked Gaara as Kakashi announced the final match, calling for Kyūbi to come down to the arena. Naruto had fought the previous semifinal and was already present, standing next to Kakashi, eagerly anticipating the coming fight. Both of them have already proven that they're worthy of not only the Chunin title, but also the Junin title. Still, I'm really curious as to what they're going to show us during this next fight. I've noticed that they're both holding back, Gaara replied. He'd been waiting patiently as his friend fought with the other Chunin hopefuls, enjoying every moment that he watched the fights. Every punch, every kick, made him think back at the battle he and Naruto had fought out during the previous time Naruto had been in the exam. That was the first time that someone had actually understood him, had talked to him about the demon that had been sealed inside of him. As he watched Kyūbi walk towards Naruto and Kakashi, Gaara felt a pang of jealousy. While he was glad that the sand demon had been extracted out of his body, he actually was a bit envious of Naruto's relationship with Kyūbi. While he had gained several friends and people that he could trust, he still hadn't experienced anything like love. While he knew that it probably was only a matter of time, he couldn't help but feel left behind a bit. Even his sister, Temari, had managed to seduce someone. Sure, it concerned the laziest shinobi of Konoha, a certain Nara Shikamaru, but still. It's sort of funny, Gaara thought wistfully. While I beat him at becoming a Kage, he beat me in finding true love. Now I'm wondering which is the biggest victory of the two. Tsunade watched silently as Gaara slowly sank away in his thoughts. She knew that seeing his old friend again brought up a lot of emotions. Kyūbi's presence had probably only strengthened those feelings. Still, he considered Gaara's current evaluation to be correct. Both Naruto and Kyūbi were more than worthy of the Junin title. The moment they would be promoted to Chunin, they'd receive their promotion to status of Junin, effective immediately. Unlike the Chunin rank, the Junin and Tokubetsu Junin ranks were not given through results of an exam, but rather by the village Kage when he or she deemed the shinobi in question worthy of being called a Junin. They did have one last fight to go though, she realized, and quickly nodded to Kakashi, indicating that he could let the fight begin. Kakashi sighed as he raised his hand, signaling the two fighters to get ready. He'd been wanting to read the latest edition of Kyūbi'part Paradise, which was currently unaccounted for, but Tsunade had semi-forced him to act as referee for the final phase of the exam, and while he didn't like missing his favorite literature, he liked joining the author of said books in a random crater even less. Just as he was about to bring down his arm, indicating the beginning of the fight, a loud bang could be heard as a massive cloud of smoke appeared between Kyūbi and Naruto. Instantly, the silver-haired Junin was in full combat mode. Recalling the last time a disturbance had occurred during the Chunin exam, he didn't want to take any risks. The lack of subsequent explosions or smoke bombs going off did make him wonder about the true nature of the disturbance though. As the smoke cleared, the eyebrows of about half the stadium were raised as the object inside of the smoke became visible. What the hell is that? Naruto said as he watched the object. I think it's some sort of wooden thing, Kyūbi said, equally confused. Oi, Kakashi, you have any idea of what this is? As a Black Ops legend, Kakashi had seen many things, but this was not one of them. I really have no idea, Kyūbi-san, he replied as he studied the object. I think it's a statue of some sort of strange animal, perhaps from deep in the wilderness. Inside said animal, Itachi was seething. His plan should have been perfect. After all, he'd copied it from some weirdos from the old times, and anything he copied was done so perfectly. If it had succeeded in the past, it should succeed in the present. As he heard people outside of the statue continue making wild guesses about the true identity of his creation, his anger slowly started mounting. I think it's a pig or something, Kyūbi said, warily eyeing the statue. It's not a pig, it's a weasel, a Trojan weasel, isn't it obvious? Itachi shouted as a hatch on the side of the construction popped open and the head of the Uchiha popped out. For those that don't realize it, the literal translation of Itachi means weasel in English, hence the pun. Itachi! Naruto shouted in surprise, immediately dropping into a combat stance, ready to attack. Oh, for crying out loud, not again Itachi, Kyūbi huffed, what is it with you Uchiha and disturbing Chunin exams? As she said this, she stomped up to the construction, ignoring Itachi's highly annoyed look. Tsunade, pass, she shouted as she grabbed one of the legs of the wooden weasel and threw it towards the Hokage's stand at full force. Instantly catching on to Kyūbi's plan, Tsunade jolted upright and ran towards the edge of the stand, putting as much chakra as she could into her fist before punching the wooden construction with all her might, releasing the built-up chakra at exactly the same moment. Itachi let out a strangled cry as the Trojan weasel rocketed into the sky, flying further and further until it was nothing but a dot in the sky. I knew it wouldn't work, Kisame sighed as he sat down near the campfire he'd made. It'd take a few days before Itachi got back, so he planned to make the most of it. Damn, he loved lazing around. I guess that now that Itachi is currently out of the way, we can start the final fight of the Chunin exams, Kakashi announced dryly, nodding towards Kyūbi and Naruto. He'd had his share of excitement for today, and he still needed to find one of his more recent Ika Ika books, he just couldn't seem to remember where he had last put it. Milliseconds after he'd made the announcement, dust flew up from the arena floor as the two fighters clashed. Kakashi swallowed heavily as he raised his forehead protector, revealing the Sharingan eye. He had a hunch that he'd need its abilities to survive refereeing this particular match. Naruto was smiling, he knew that he had the advantage in a fight with Kyūbi while she was in her human form. He had the upper hand in speed, strength and chakra capacity. The only thing that she could do to counter it was play it dirty, and use foxfire, a lot of foxfire. His eyes widened as he saw her charge up several shots, one on the tip of each of her tails. Q-chan, you do remember that we're in the middle of an arena, right? That attack would probably wipe out 3/4 of the spectators, he said quickly, trying to gain her attention so that she wouldn't release the attack. Naruto's hurried voice shook her out of her focus and almost instantly, the foxfire disappeared. Sorry Naru-kun, I forgot, she said sheepishly before launching herself into the air and slamming down onto Naruto using her tails. Much to her surprise, the Naruto she'd just hit disappeared in a puff of smoke. Figures that he'd use Kage Bunshin here, she muttered as she looked around, trying to find out where Naruto was hiding. While she normally just blasted the entire surrounding area with foxfire, she couldn't do that here because of the audience. She growled in irritation as her search turned up nothing. Just as she was about to charge up another shot of foxfire, though a bit smaller this time, she heard Naruto's voice coming from directly above her. Rasen Shuriken, he shouted as he launched two of the wind-enhanced Rasengan towards Kyūbi. Crap, she cursed as the razor-sharp blades closed in on her. Acting on reflexes, she threw herself backwards, trying to get away as Naruto's technique came flying downwards, gouging deep trenches in the earth as they cut through several dozens of meters of rock. Gotcha Q-chan, she heard Naruto whisper in her ear right after she had skidded to a halt. He was standing right behind her, a kunai in hand, holding the shinobi dagger against her throat. Same here Naru-kun, she smiled as she leaned her head backwards, looking him straight in the eyes. As she said this, she poked gently into his back with her tails. She'd hardened the hairs on them to razor-sharp blades, which were now pointing directly at his vitals. It sure looks like that, he grinned before he leaned in to kiss her. Kakashi and about half of the stadium blushed as the two Namakazes shared their rather intimate moment, not even bothering to move even the slightest bit. Right, Kakashi said as he coughed rather subtly, trying to get the attention of the two lovebirds. I declare this match to be a draw. Seeing that he was simply being ignored, Kakashi sighed and used a shunshin to leave the arena. His job was over and done with. Tsunade would take care of the rest of the exam, and there was still that case of the missing book. Then I hereby declare the final phase of the Chunin exams to be officially over, Tsunade shouted as she stood up from her seat again. Gaara joining her moments after. I would like to ask that all participants gather on the arena floor, and I'll announce the results, she continued, happy to see that Naruto and Kyūbi had finally finished their moment. As she, Gaara and a few other Junin discussed for a moment, the rest of the participants made it down to the arena, all the while casting somewhat envious looks at the couple. While they had stopped kissing, Naruto was still holding Kyūbi, his arms folded around her stomach as he hugged her from behind, Kyūbi returning the gesture with her tails. She'd long since made the hairs soft again and was now using all 9 of her tails to hold on to her loved one. Tsunade smiled a bit as she saw the little scene. Taking a deep breath, she announced the results. Those that have passed the Chunin exams, she began, are Masuzo Kazushige from Iwa, Ajibana Eiichi from Kumo, Fujikage Kaorukasuga from Suna, Horigome Kaide also from Suna, Namikaze Naruto from Konoha and Namikaze Kyūbi also from Konoha. Naruto almost literally exploded with joy as he heard Tsunade announce his name as one of the people that had passed the exam. This was the first step he'd taken on the road to becoming the next Hokage. And I also have another announcement to make, Tsunade continued, interrupting Naruto's happy-go-lucky mode switch. He looked at her strangely. For as far as he knew, the only thing Tsunade had to say was the result of the exam, and that was it. For her to suddenly continue making announcements was somewhat strange. It has also been decided that both Namikaze Kyūbi and Namikaze Naruto are hereby given the title of Junin. Their abilities have been under supervision for the duration of the entire exam by a team of our most talented shinobi, and they have come to the conclusion that the Namikazes are exceptional shinobi, and thus worthy of their promotion. Tsunade smiled as she watched Naruto's expression go from confused, to disbelieving, to downright exhilarated. He'd always been rather easy to read for her, and probably most other people as well, but it still felt good to see his joy rise more and more as he slowly understood more and more of exactly what she had said. "Woohoo!" he shouted as he jumped into the air with joy. Not only had he made Chunin, both himself and Kyūbi had been promoted to Junin on the spot. Something like that was almost unheard of, yet here it was, happening to the two of them. He spontaneously started dancing around a bit, dragging a flustered Kyūbi along with him, even while the rest of the stadium couldn't help but chuckle at the bonus spectacle they were seeing. It wasn't every day that you got to see a flustered queen of demons. As the initial joy wore off, Naruto looked up at the Hokage's stand, and only now noticed the lone figure standing beside Tsunade. "Gaara," he whispered as he abruptly stopped moving, his eyes fixed on his friend. Kyūbi, following Naruto's gaze, stopped moving as well as she recognized the former host of Shukaku. "Come on, let's go meet him," she whispered in Naruto's ear, gently tugging on his arm. Without a word, he followed her onto the stairs that led to the Hokage's stand, his official Junin promotion and Gaara. In a way, it was one of the most important stairs he'd ever taken in his life. Meanwhile, in Iwagakure, "Sir, I've received a report from our contacts that the defenses of Konoha have been crippled, again," an Iwa nin said in an excited voice against his superior. He'd only just been promoted to his current rank as communications officer. While he'd been a Chunin for some time now, he'd constantly been occupied with rather tiring patrol missions near the border with Fire Country. While at first he'd been excited, he soon came to realize that those were the worst type of missions. Konoha nin rarely crossed over the border, and when they did, they usually had permission given to them by higher command. Border skirmishes were extremely few and far between. In his opinion, all those missions did was waste manpower. He'd been overjoyed when he had received his transfer notice. While his current assignment was boring as well at times, it still lacked the tiring physical aspect. That and every now and then an exciting report came in, just like it had today. Bah! His superior, a Tokubetsu Junin, grumbled as he read the report, figures their defenses would fail again. Theirs are nothing compared to the walls of our fortress. As he said this, the nin turned towards the wall, one of many surrounding Iwagakure. If there was one thing Iwa nin excelled in, it was defending. They'd perfected it until it had become almost a delicate art. Their rock-hard defenses were renowned for their power and inability to be broken through by all but the most powerful opponents. Sir, the report also confirms that the rumors we've heard about the Yellow Flash's son and his supposed relationship with Kyūbi no Kitsune are true though, the man continued. While the news of Konoha's defenses being broken was great, the second bit was a bit more disconcerting. I say let them come, the Junin continued, if they want to start a war, they'll have one, but first they'll have to break through our walls, something that has never happened before in Iwagakure's history. Just as the Junin finished talking, a strangled cry filled the air, causing both the two nin and several other people to look up at the source. Jesus Christ! Both nin exclaimed at the same time as they saw what remained of a certain Trojan weasel come crashing down into the outer wall, causing a whole section of it to collapse. What just happened? Itachi asked himself as he stumbled out of the wreckage, holding his head in his hands. Looking up, he came face to face with a horde of rather irritated Iwa nin. Nothing good I guess, he muttered before turning around and running away from Iwagakure at full speed, leaving his pursuers in the dust. Naruto couldn't help but grin as he entered the Hokage's stand at the topmost level of the Chunin exam arena. 2 meters away from him, stood his longtime friend, the trademark gourd sitting next to his chair. It's been a long time, Naruto, Gaara spoke first, breaking the silence. That it has, Gaara, Naruto replied. Meanwhile, Kyūbi stood right behind him, watching the two friends greet each other. Well then, Tsunade interrupted them, since Naruto and Kyūbi have finally made it up here, I guess it's time to make their promotions official. She signaled one of the Chunin guarding the stand, who quickly made a few seals, causing 2 customized Junin jackets to appear on the floor in front of Tsunade. Naruto's eyes widened as he saw the vest laying in front of them. He'd been expecting some sort of standard vest, but nothing like this. The jacket was clearly made to suit his own clothing style. Most of it was black, with a few orange streaks running over the entire length of it. Smiling, he picked it up, eager to study it from every possible angle. His breath hitched in his throat as he turned it around, bringing a detailed symbol into view. Meanwhile, Kyūbi had also picked up her own vest, which was the same design as Naruto's, but with a deep crimson instead of the orange lining the vest. Noticing Naruto's change in demeanor, she looked at his vest. Turning her own vest around, she noticed that she had the same symbol embroidered into the back of her vest. Tsunade smiled as she saw the reactions on both the new Junin's faces. It had been exactly what she'd been hoping for. I hope you like the new Namikaze clan symbol I've had a friend design, she smiled at the two of them. Naruto and Kyūbi were still staring at the sign. Naruto virtually at the brink of tears. All this time he'd wanted only a single other thing besides being Hokage, to have his own clan. While he had known for a while now that he was in fact a member of a clan, only by seeing the symbol that would now represent himself and his clan, did that knowledge really get through to him. Kyūbi was the first to reply to Tsunade's question. It's beautiful, she whispered, still staring at the symbol. It was clear that the artist had taken into account both hers and Naruto's origins and backgrounds. In the center was the original spiral that had once been Naruto's own logo. Around the orange spiral, however, were 9 crimson tails, encircling the entire symbol. It wasn't in an oppressive manner though. The nine tails almost seemed to come alive, intent to protect the spiral in the middle from anything that would threaten it. Who made this Tsunade Ba-chan? Naruto asked. He wanted to personally thank the artist for his work. You better ask that question to the cage over there, she smiled broadly. Naruto's head turned towards Gaara, a somewhat confused look on his face. It was my brother, Kankuro, that designed it. The clothiers here in Konoha sewed it onto the jackets, Gaara explained as Naruto's jaw slowly fell open. You mean your brother made this? Yes, though I did suggest the idea of giving you a clan symbol to him, he did the rest himself. He's actually quite skilled with drawing. He has to be though, putting all that paint all over his face every morning, Gaara continued, snickering a bit when he came to the part of his bigger brother putting on makeup every morning. He was however completely caught unaware when he was suddenly enveloped in a crushing hug, courtesy of Naruto. While it had been a few years since he'd lost Shukaku, and thus the protection of the sand shield, there were still very few people that dared to touch him. The only exceptions were his siblings, and a few trusted shinobi that he'd befriended during his reign as the cage. But even they never tried anything without making absolutely sure that Gaara knew their intentions. Being spontaneously hugged like he was now, was something completely unknown to him. He soon recovered though, and returned the friendly hug to his best friend. Kyūbi shared a knowing smile with Tsunade as both females watched the exchange between the former Jinchuriki. After that, a formal ceremony signaled the end of the Chunin exam. Tsunade and Gaara, with Kyūbi and Naruto right behind them, moved down towards the arena floor, where the graduates, along with their instructors, were standing. Both the cages shook the new Chunin's hands, congratulating them on their achievements and handed them their vests, provided by the same Chunin that had made both Naruto and Kyūbi's jackets appear. So, what do you want us to do now that we're Junin Tsunade Ba-chan? Naruto asked in his usually jovial tone as they walked out of the arena. Stop by my office in a few days, Naruto, Tsunade replied, and we'll see about that assignment of yours. Woohoo! Naruto shouted before pulling Kyūbi into a hug, obviously startling the fox demoness, noticeable by the sudden and violent sways her tails were making. She didn't get the chance to say anything though. In a sudden swirl of leaves, he'd used a shunshin to transport both of them to Ichiraku's. Tsunade just stood there and watched, somewhat ignoring Gaara's raised eyebrow. He didn't need an explanation though. He of all people knew that Naruto was a spur-of-the-moment kind of person. Or at least, he was most of the time. So what'll it be for my favorite customer and his lady? Ichiraku asked as the couple appeared in front of his shop. Being a long-time supplier of ramen to shinobi, he was used to the rather peculiar quirks they had. Like for instance, using a shunshin to appear in just about every place. The usual. Naruto grinned as he sat down, motioning to Kyūbi to do the same. And for the lady? Ichiraku asked, not even blinking at the fact that Kyūbi was visiting his store once again. Just a bowl of miso ramen for me please, she asked, ignoring some of the more skittish customers. Coming right up, Tsuki said, before frowning a bit as he spotted the jackets the young couple was wearing. Say Naruto, what's with the jackets? I know the Chunin exams were today, but those aren't the standard issue vests. Hearing this, the rest of the customers, or at least those that hadn't seen the Chunin finals, looked up, curious as to what had happened now. Knowing the two shinobi, they weren't exactly surprised to find out that yet again, they'd done something completely unexpected. Oh these? Naruto grinned broadly. Tsunade Ba-chan saw it fit for us to be promoted to Junin straight after we'd made Chunin. That's why she gave us these jackets, to celebrate the occasion. A loud, eehhhhh, echoed along the seats of the small ramen stands the moment Naruto finished his explanation. Oh, is that so, Naruto? Tsuki chuckled. Well then, this is on the house, as a present to you, becoming one of the elite shinobi that protect my business, in more ways than one, I might add. It was late that night when Naruto and Kyūbi finally decided to go home. They'd spent the rest of the day at Ichiraku's, talking with both Tyuki and Ayame, and several of their friends that just so happened to pass by. Afterwards, they'd moved on to one of the more